Indeed. Okay, and we are live. And yes, welcome to our second Perdido Street Station discussion. And yeah, I have with me tonight here Jarrod from the Fantasy Thinker. Hello, Jarrod. I hope you're well.
Good, yep.
Yeah. Varsha from Reading by the Rainy Mountain, and Raf from Raf Blue Text. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I hope the others have not been seen have not seen Slake Moths.
I hope so too. That would be really not a good development if the rest of the participants. No, I know they are alive and well. At least I hope that they are. I had communications. Let's put it this way.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the book has, developed in quite a way, hasn't it?
Yeah. I know. That's why I was last time so keen on asking you guys what you think, which kind of genre this would be, because I already knew where it was going. I'm like, this is going to be fun. Once you find out.
Well, I mean, having read some Yevel before, I was quite sure that we're in for a genre bender. So, yeah, I wasn't so surprised in that respect. Yeah. Do we have any favorite bit what we want to start with to discuss? Anything? Any favorites?
Well, maybe the fact that caterpillar was kind of empathic.
Yeah.
And it was it started to pupate or mutate or whatever you call that. When it had the dream shit drug. And I found that hilarious.
The experience that we got described as well, that was quite the ride. Yeah.
And but the question I had about that beginning, where the caterpillar is getting fed a drug, but why does the drug dealer, Gadget his name, slip the Mickey to Isaac?
I think it's just revenge for Isaac punching him in the face earlier.
Yeah.
Because
also he's already high on something.
First of all, he was totally high on something, and secondly, I think as revenge in a way, and I think he explains it a little bit by saying, it would be good if you actually know what you're dealing with. So here, let's have a go at this and see what this really does, so that you actually know what you're buying of me. Because he engages him as the future dealer for more of this drug, just in case he needs more. And
so just some chaotic fun on his part.
And
I don't know how many people that do take drugs from time to time. I've certainly met these kind of people, and this is totally in character for some people that engage in psychedelics and stuff. Also, I mean, let's not forget that, like, for a long time, the CIA did the same fucking thing to soldiers and just everyone in the 60s and 70s.
We have some people in the chat as well. So
hey, Kadia and Britain.
Yeah, hey Britain. Hey Shadia. And we have Mike, and we also have Parameter. Hello, everybody.
Hello. It's kind of fun that there's people there that I've just talked, like 24 hours ago, we already talked in live chat.
But I really like this about BookTube, that you can, that we have the technology. We can have global book clubs, so to say. So you're not relying anymore. Yeah, you're not relying anymore on what's in your village or town or wherever you are. You can just open your laptop or even just your phone and wherever you are. Hey.
Yeah, that's great. That's true.
Yeah.
So this back to this drug.
Yeah.
It gives Isaac a trip, but it makes the caterpillar grow.
Big time.
Was that explained? Like, what is it that exactly nourishes this empathic caterpillar to grow into, eventually goes into moth mode? And what is it?
That's an interesting
What is it?
question.
Because I don't know if that was explained yet. I don't remember it being explained yet. It definitely had a massive effect on the creature.
How I understand it, like later when this caterpillar has hatched into the moth, and kind of like frees his the other 4 that are in that biohazard lab, and it's described that they're somehow suspended with shackles against the wall, and it also says each has a bucket underneath that
it's
gathers
literally
up.
dream shit.
Yeah,
it literally is dream
the
shit.
Yeah, and I think that's the drug.
Yeah, but it's no longer the biohazard lab. I think that's important to understand. It's not the biohazard lab. It is Mr. Motley's compound.
Yeah, but I think the first time we only get this afterwards, that it's explained that this was sold off to Mr. Motley.
That part you get later, but the plot, like you follow the moth, the one slake moth when it leaves Isaac's building, and it flies around, and it flies to, and its path of flight is described. It flies to Bone Town, and it finds this huge bituminous building, and that's where it rips out the window and finds them, well, jailed to the wall, and so forth. So it's kind of clear that it is Motley's compound, and then later on you find out that
the government has sold this whole research operation to him. So I think the drug is obviously literally the shit of this moth, and I don't know if they generally feed it to their young to make them grow or not. No, could well be that what we might interpret as shit is some other type of secretion. But the moths, we find also out, they seem to suck, I think, the dreams and memories out of people's brains, and this is how they feed.
Yeah, that's kind of the point. Also,
I think this is why the caterpillar can actually flourish and grow when it gets the drug.
Yeah,
because this is what the drug does as well. The drug induces kind of like those dreams and memories of other people in Isaac's brain.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like with birds, when birds like take the food and then they kind of pre-chew it and then they throw it back up into like the baby bird's mouth. I think it's kind of like that. Although one thing, did you remember, like, realize that it was like the whole like selling off of the slake moth program to Motley was foreshadowed in like some of the chapters we read last time?
Yeah, when Lynn is doing her sculpture, she overhears some conversations that I think point into that direction.
Yeah, Motley, when he's just like rambling while he's doing the sculpture, he talks about like how he's having like something big coming up that will like make supply completely,
that's right,
safe for him, and that's sort of the foreshadowing for that.
Yeah, Shadia says as well, the drug is its food. And Britton says it goes back to what I think Isaac's core flaw is. He rushes into things without thinking of the consequences, which smacks him in the face hard. Yeah, I mean, that much I think is clear now that...
his scientific, that's how science works, doesn't it?
Yeah, his scientific curiosity gets the better of him, and he keeps, I mean, that's why he keeps the caterpillar, no? Because he wants to know what that turns into.
Yeah, although, I mean, to be fair, there's he has had like no hint that this was like like when he got it, like no one knew what he was getting there. I think that's that's kind of the kind of part of the problem there. It's like when you look at like what is going on.
That's very true. Initially, yeah. But when this thing is kind of like, what is it in the end, 3 foot long?
Something like that.
Yeah. I would have thought he should perhaps have wondered a bit what he's gotten into, because
but at that point, what's he supposed to do? Kill the thing? Clearly, he's not someone who, like, even like with his other specimen, he just set them all free. He's not someone who would kill an animal.
No, he wouldn't, because that bird he had for research purposes, his body comes and kills it, not because he can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I think that's kind of the problem. Like as soon as the first like the slake moth grub was like caterpillar was taken out of the system, something would have like happened because so that's kind of the sad part. There is like Isaac is the person who does it because he ends up with it, but the problem starts much earlier, and I think that's sort of like the underlying structure there. Like when you look at it as criticism, you have like a very dangerous, potentially illegal research project of the city or the militia, whatever you want to call them, in this point, the state. And the question is like, why are they fucking around with slake moths, which they obviously know are insanely dangerous? Like, what kind of research is the state doing with that? What's their goal? Are they trying to create drugs or are they trying to create weapons? Because that's like the only two reasons why you fuck around with that stuff.
Yeah.
Or
the drug could be weaponized. Yeah.
Yeah, well, of course it can, and I think that's kind of the interesting part that lies behind that, especially when you compare it to like our history. Like governments do weird and dangerous research for mostly weapons projects and stuff like that, and the larger your system is, the more corruption happens in that, and it will leak out, and that will be and that will cause danger, which is exactly what happens because the clerk stealing that one grub, he's just corrupt. He doesn't care, and he doesn't even know what he's doing. Because like the label just says like SM4. It doesn't even say slake moth. It just like it says like SM larvae or whatever. He doesn't know what he's doing because how could he? And he just
even if it would have that slake moth, would he have known what it is?
No, of course not. So he doesn't know, and he just sells it on, which is like petty corruption, which you have in every system, and that's how these dangerous things get loose. And then on the other hand, you obviously have the ever-present collusion between the more secret sides of state research and organized crime, which is also something that we've certainly never seen in our world happen, where maybe like a research program that didn't work out for reasons whatsoever got sold off, and it usually gets sold off to people who have unsavory ideals, I guess. And I think that's an important part of like underlying this story, one that you obviously find again and again in other like classic horror or more modern horror stories, where exactly that kind of thing happens. Like the government fucks up, and then it ends up with like criminals, and they obviously also fuck up, and then suddenly the monster is loose.
Yeah, and I imagine you could probably imagine a whole bunch of other kinds of research going into that too. It really is a wonder drug, so who knows what you can get out of that.
Yeah. Would you take that drug? Would you take it?
No, I'm not going to take anything.
Varsha, would you take the drug?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, the drug trip that we get described doesn't sound so enticing either, I would say.
No.
No.
Well, that's the point. Like, if you take drugs, you take them to find out what will happen. It's not exactly like if someone would sell me dream shit, I might try it because I don't know what I'm getting into. It's because we have that advantage of having read like Isaac's stream of consciousness there, or someone else's consciousness, I guess.
Yeah.
But like.
Depends on how experimental.
That's what will keep us. I mean, unless you're people that go like, I will never take any form of drugs. Like, if you're just interested in drugs, then like, why not? Why not try dream shit?
Yeah, Varsha, what do you make of the whole caterpillar situation?
Well, I thought it was fascinating to read. I really enjoyed reading the drug trip, and I did wonder where that was coming from. It felt like real dreams that he was experiencing somehow. And I think what you said made a lot of sense about the moths actually sucking people's dreams and thoughts, perhaps. And that's what's being fed back into this caterpillar and Isaac as well. What was it? Yeah, I didn't make. I think I missed something earlier that you guys clarified for me, but I forgot what that was. But I think that was illuminating to listen to this discussion.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I kind of glossed over the selling of the government selling it to Motley.
Yeah.
I sort of missed that a little bit, so it was good that was clarified.
Yeah.
Because that makes sense. That actually makes complete sense.
Oh, I remembered
Yeah, I
what I
mean,
misunderstood. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, as I said, we only find this out after the moths have been released. And like Raf said, it's foreshadowed beforehand that we kind of like know, yeah, when Lynn is doing her sculpture, that she overhears some conversations, and it's clear. At that point, actually, I was thinking more, yeah, okay, he is some of those drug lords, and this is the stuff that he's selling now, or his crew is selling. I wasn't aware either that the government actually sold off this whole how shall I say, the whole thing, no? This research project.
Yeah.
I misunderstood it as Motley selling the grubs to the government. I thought that was the exchange they had, and that the government was selling dream shit back to Motley to circulate. That's what I read that as. I didn't. I didn't understand that Motley had bought the moths themselves, not the other way around.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of the problem, right? Like they maybe used him to sell that drug to see how the drug works on the populace and so forth, through probably some form of like intermediary. And then when they didn't want to do that project for whatever reasons anymore, they just like sold him the whole project. So that's kind of what that conversation is, that or that monologue that Lynn overhears, where he talks about like that this stuff is going really well, but soon he'll actually have like actual production facilities so he can do it himself, and that will make the whole like, because at the beginning when they first talk about dream shit, it's made very clear that it's new and very rare to get, sort of.
And expensive, obviously, as well, no?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of the point. Like they probably just like sent it to different suppliers into the populace, and then when they decided to stop the research, or like end it or whatever, they just sold the whole thing off to one of the drug lords, and it turns out to end up with Motley and not with what's her name, Francine.
Yeah,
Francine. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thought I had with the whole government drug research connection was because Mieville is a Marxist. I couldn't help thinking of the Marx sentence, opiates for the masses. Now he means religion with that, but of course, I mean, a writer can turn this into anything, no?
That's certainly one way of looking at it. I think there's another way of reading that as a metaphor that we might like maybe come back to later on, because I think you can see those like those moths are sort of like when we turns into horror, but it specifically turns into something more like cosmic horror than say like body horror, because we've had a body horror in this before, which with all the the remade and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the moths are very deliberately more into like the cosmic horror side of things, and I think that.
I was going to say a little bit of psychic horror too,
And I think like the story arcs that we've read for today's discussion, I think we have a lot of this more cosmic horror, no? Because we have other weird entities that were introduced to as well. No? There's the ambassador, then there's the Weaver, which also I think the Weaver is very much into this interdimensional cosmic horror, whatever.
That's where we ended. That's where we ended with
that was where we ended with,
and it was like, whoa, this big spider creature. And that was very interesting. But you mentioned earlier, about the that Isaac should have known, maybe he was responsible for the caterpillar getting big and all that stuff. But I thought that Mieville did a pretty good job of showing how the characters, how have a lot to worry about. They have their own things to worry about.
Oh yeah.
And so they each have a lot to go on, and so they're paying attention to their own stuff, while the reader has a bit more clue about what is going on around them than the characters do. And I thought he did a pretty good job of separating that out.
Yeah. Britain Says the Weaver was one of my favorites. Not so much for me. I mean, okay, the scene itself is cool. I'm not into spiders, so I have to say. And when I heard when he was mentioned the first time, kind of like this whole like, oh, we might have to ask the Weaver, and I was thinking, what would that be? And then I thought, oh yeah, it's probably spiders. So please not. But yeah, of course it's spiders. Yeah.
And this creature's sentient, and it's hired by
They hired. They're hired
by the police, right?
Yeah, I wondered what they were going to pay it. What could a creature of that sort possibly want from them?
Yeah, what could that creature want? I mean, obviously the Weaver's into scissors. We've heard that.
Right.
Scissors seem to be a good way of payment. But also,
I don't think it's hired. The Weaver is not really hired. The Weaver is there, and they try to communicate with it. But
that's the last. That's the very last sentence in the.
But it's the sentence by.
It's hired, right? That's what.
But isn't it It's not the mayor. It's
the not rug gutter.
Yeah, Eliza Stamford.
Yeah.
The interior.
So it's hired, right? Yeah. But even if they think it's hired, I don't think the Weaver is a creature that would enter any type of contract. Or, I mean, it only has agreed to look into this because I suppose it's in its own interest to get rid of the slate moth in a way. I don't know.
Maybe. We don't know yet.
We don't know yet.
Yeah.
But I mean, what's interesting about the Weaver also is that the Weaver is described as an artist as well, no? So we have Lynn, the artist. We have this interdimensional spider artist, no? The Weaver.
Yeah.
And also that there are more than one.
Yeah.
So
even though it's painted almost as an all-seeing, all-knowing entity, but there are multiple of them. Like its introduction was something to the effect that it controls the tapestry of the world, right? But then there are other weavers too. So that made me wonder whether there's like parallel Earths or if they all together control the weave of the world, so to speak.
I think they seem to be almost in kind of like combating each other, because it said that some of them couldn't agree about the weave of the world, and the argument got out of hand and they killed each other. No, I mean,
for example, that's the point. I think they're individualists that have very unique perspectives on the weave.
Yeah,
like killing each other over the question whether 1,000 men should be killed or not, because one of those might be more aesthetically pleasing than the other.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, and Britain also says, I love that even hell is too afraid to deal with the slake moth.
Yeah, well, because hell is very human, and that's kind of the underlying thing, that hell is sort of like a human thing, which is why they have the same psyche, and you have to be like a very different psyche to not get captured by the slake moth thing, which is why they end up with the Weaver doing whatever the Weaver does, if the Weaver ends up actually succeeding. I mean, let's face the fact we've not even hit half of the book.
Yeah.
Well, if it's succeeding, and also we don't know what the intervention would be, how would it kill them? What would be happening then? Because now the slake moths are part of the weave of the world.
Yeah, it might just decide that like just killing
those
humans
parts
might be better.
out. What happens to the rest of the weave then? No, that's another thing.
Yeah, it's a unique thing.
So there's a lot of these cosmic elements, like you said, coming into this thing, because even hell is like a new cosmic element that we got introduced to in these chapters, and then that's the spider and the moths themselves. So there's a lot of different fantasy aspects, I guess, getting thrown into this scientific city that's trying to do science-y type stuff. And I found that blend fascinating, that China put that together like that.
And let's not forget the torque.
Oh
yeah. Which also is like almost like a cosmic force in a way.
Yeah, it's sort of like maybe nuclear power, but maybe something else.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Then Isaac totally shut down his bird friend. What was his name again?
Jarrod.
Jarrod.
Yeah.
Yep. Totally shut him down with that query.
Yeah. There was some suggestion of higher dimensions with the moths and the spider too. I wonder if they inhabit the same dimensions and that's how they can deal with each other, or if that's fascinating. That was interesting.
Well, I mean,
but they seem to have people who are able to access those dimensions, even of only rudimentary, no? So Rutgutter has this guy with him who seems to be able to open some type of communication channel. And then Durkin visits what's he called, communicatrix? Who does a similar thing, and also with a similar type of apparatus that kind of like is somehow using battery power or whatever, then to that she can communicate then with Felix, no? So yeah.
And I wonder if the torque is also of a similar nature, or if it's outside the bounds of all of these.
Yeah, it's not really explained. Like apparently it's some sort of weird energy that's also around somewhere, and they can just try to access it, and then usually things explode. Or but apparently it also, like with the catatopic stain, the cacatopic the cacatopic stain, it just like happened to appear somewhere suddenly. And
yeah,
that's a mystery to be solved yet, I guess.
Yeah, but
I would not expect all questions to be answered in this book.
Right.
Probably not, especially as it's the first in a trilogy, so we'll see. The torque is, again, I think it's described almost as an alien force. No, we don't really know where it's coming from. I mean, like Jarrod said, there are reminiscences towards atomic power or atomic bombs, because it leaves
Stuff
deformities and things. So
there's a lot going on, and we haven't even talked about like Lynn's really interesting like exploration of her past, which I found fascinating. That's like really interesting, because like what I so really appreciate about like that Lynn plotline in this part is her kind of looking at her past, her specific past and tradition, and that describes so much of like a migrant experience, right? Like a refugee migrant experience of trying to find, curling back in, becoming more like exaggerating your cultural backgrounds in specific ways, becoming more extremist almost in like her mother's case, but also having that stratification within migrant communities of those who arrived earlier, looking down on those who arrived later, because you're already sort of marginalized, and you kind of use that to marginalize the people with that you can still marginalize. So having that whole like stratification that happens because of how society tends to marginalize people in a way, like having all of that, and her slowly peeling back one layer after the other, right? She first goes back to Kinkan, where the more like settled and more accepted Khepri live, and that's sort of like where she, from where she goes back to the other part, which name I have forgotten at the moment, to face up to her past and like her mother's place, and then she goes back to Kinkan, and I just found it's like a really nuanced and interesting approach to exploring that that specific migrant or marginalized experience with its like social implications without, actually writing realist fiction.
Yeah. Yeah, Catherine says the description of the insect aspect cult was terrifying. Self-hatred, really.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would say self-hatred, but it induces some type of body hatred, no? So
Well, we find that in certain Abrahamic religions, especially on the in how they treat women, and that's really that is, and you have people, obviously, women that are believers in these more like radical versions of Christianity or Islam that go down that route and do build in like a lot of self-hatred. So having that in there, I find really interesting, but tying it to like the economic predations and all of that around it, I think is an interesting aspect, because a lot of times that's exactly what kind of fuels that, because if you're not under these external pressures, there's very few reasons to just actually fall down into that more like cultic elements of religion, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in the book it's described very much as a cultic element, but if we look at the history of Christianity in the Middle Ages, it was quite accepted doctrine that the body is sinful.
Oh,
and
yeah,
that flesh has to be subdued because of that. And I think this is exactly what is described there as well. Only there it's kind of like a gendered thing. It does only apply to females because only females have a human body. The males are just beetles. So
also there also only women
as well.
Yeah, I think, but it's made clear that, and I think like with the medieval part, yes, there is obviously within Christianity, with medieval Christianity, there is a certain element of disdaining the body that is there, but like the really like hating the physical body is more like a Gnostic thing that you see with like a Cathar or a Bogomil heresy and the Gnostic side of things, because that's where like the full on like going beyond just or expecting that from everyone. I think that's kind of the point. Like within Christianity, medieval Christianity, you have the idea that some people do mortify the flesh and go into like retreat, and they do that to sort of take upon themselves that stuff from like the rest of the society, which goes and does the whole the regular living thing, because people still realize that you need to sort of like have a society. But within
the flagellation and stuff, right?
The flagellation stuff is a very unique and later thing, but it kind of goes down the same kind of route. But like the full disdain,
but also things
of
like fasting, or I mean, in Ireland you had this whole type of kind of like hermits who just are finding a cave, or
that's a classic one.
yeah. Like, I mean,
but that's usually the point. It's a hermit who does that, and part of how that society works is that the hermit does it, so the rest of society doesn't have to. They're like taking that upon themselves to basically, take upon themselves as a service to the rest of society. Whereas in like cults, more like cultic, like Gnostic societies, like the Cathar, Bogomil, and like earlier Gnostic ones, it's sort of expected of everyone to do that and just despise their own body, because you need to get rid of the body, because it's created by the demiurge, who is not a nice person.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, like the god that they worship, it's called the insect aspect. So obviously you have to be as insect as possible.
Yeah, they're repudiating sapiency.
It's supposed to be suppressed.
Yeah,
they're repudiating sentience up to a point, right? Because
Yeah.
the male part is obviously not sentient. They're just like beetles.
Yeah, that was hilarious. The male beetles were just these things scurrying about, and it's like the female Kepri had to deal with that. But that was
that's how patriarchy works, isn't it?
Yeah, right, exactly.
That was my thought as well. Like that, it's actually a very good illustration of patriarchy.
That was the metaphor, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Britain says it's very macabre. Is that right? Is it macabre?
Yes.
Yeah.
Macabre. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, all of Mabel is very macabre. I feel like up to a point, like New Probison feels like a very terrible, like 19th century version of Gormenghast, like this sprawling place, but it's all covered in dirt and and smog and well,
Yeah.
all the effluvia of the body that are noisome.
Oh, I mean, Miebel loves
like that.
bodily fluids. No, I don't
Yeah.
think there's
Yeah,
any
he
book where they're not prominent in a way.
He loves effluvia, yeah.
Big
but I think
time, big time.
it's a choice that makes the book feel way more
Oh, yeah.
physical than a lot of fantasy, because, like,
Yeah.
let's be real, a lot of fantasy avoids those kind of things. It's gotten more popular with your Joe Abercrombies and so forth, who are really into explaining how everything on a battlefield smells like shit. But before that, we don't get the part where Aragorn goes and takes a dump behind a tree. That doesn't happen in Lord of the Rings.
Well, that
You can
doesn't
expect-
happen,
you can
and
expect that.
also, like up to a certain point, and I think this came up in the violence discussion that I had with Varsha and Philip as well. No? That that early fantasy almost sanitizes battle scenes and sanitizes violence done in a certain way. No? So
Yeah, but I don't think that's a fantasy issue. I think that's like a general media issue. It takes until like the 80s before we really see a lot of blood in movies. Like 70s and 80s is kind of when, with the giallo in Italy, Italian movies in like the 60s and 70s is sort of when we really get into showing this stuff, because you watch like 1930s, 40s action movies, your Errol Flynn's or whatever. People don't bleed all over the place and spill like guts all over the place. It's just not happening for a long time in general.
yeah, so I don't know if we can just have a one-to-one comparison between literature and especially
we
visual
can't.
media like film, because there are different censorship laws.
Yeah, of course. But I think it's a general like zeitgeist thing. Is like literature is usually a bit ahead of that, because you can do things in books that you're not allowed to do in movies, up to a point.
Yeah.
But in general, like, it takes a while for society to move towards that very specific graphic depiction of violence and bodies in general. And I think that's part of what it is. It's not just it's not a fantasy issue alone. It's like you read other like literature of the times, they're also not big on on bodily fluids.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like Miebel still pushes this to like a very different level compared to other books, even in fantasy at the moment. I mean, with just like his focus on these, like, more like the smells and the feeling that everything is always grimy and dirty. And I think it makes sense because it's an urban fantasy in that regard. I mean, it's still an urban fantasy because it's set in the city. And a lot of, like, I haven't read that much urban fantasy, but like, a lot of the urban fantasy that we read does kind of more focus on making a city look cool and having the cool places and, the different scenes and stuff like that. But like, we rarely talk about like how filthy cities are, especially if they're huge cities. I mean, except you listen to like New Yorkers talking about New York, I guess. That's like the exception.
I mean, Britain says as well, I could smell New Crobusson. And yes, I have to say, I have the same impression. With urban fantasy, I think it depends on what branch we're looking at. I think the ones that base themselves on the city novel of the 19th century or the 1930s, 40s crime noir are probably closest to this description of the city as a slimy and also politically corrupt place. Whereas there seems to be a whole version of urban fantasy, especially of American variety, of which I haven't read that much, but I've read some Sarah J. Maas recently, and her Crescent City novels are also described as urban fantasy, and that's really glitzy. Not everything is glitzy. Everybody is young, beautiful, wearing expensive clothes. No, so a very, very different type of.
But even your Dresden Files, which are technically that kind of more like detective story kind of thing, they're not that dirty. Even when Dresden goes into the underground, it's not as filthy as New Krobison by a long shot. I don't know about I haven't read the Ben Aronovich Rivers of London stories because I don't
no,
know.
they're by far not as filthy either. No.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it to be that way.
No. I mean, it's London, and some of the let's say problems London as a city has are acknowledged, but overall the center is really very much on, yeah, how should I say, the magical aspects, and this idea that all the rivers are actually magical women predominantly.
Yeah.
So it's the smells, and sometimes when the Thames and the waters are described, it might get a bit smelly, but overall nothing compared to New Krobison. I mean,
Yeah, I think a lot of that, especially the part in the slaughterhouse. I believe that's a deliberate, the slaughterhouse bit is a deliberate nod to books like The Jungle, and that's sort of more darker journalistic writing of the 30s.
That's what it reminded me of. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's deliberate on Miebel's part.
Oh yeah.
I'm 100% sure that he has read the Jungle.
Oh yeah, I would say so as well. And Britain as well makes the comment here that it's very Dickens-esque and with a sprig of Lovecraft. And I'm very sure that Miebel is well versed in both writers. So I mean, Lovecraft especially, he has quoted him and also acknowledged him as an influence in many interviews. So yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like everyone is influenced by Lovecraft, whether you want to or not.
Probably.
So I have a question.
Okay.
What was the engineer up to with the virus thing, with the construct in the laboratory there?
Yeah.
He did certainly hack that construct.
Yes. He did.
For what reason is something we'll find out later, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was wondering, because that wasn't really explained at all. He just he leaves and says, "Virus be done." He whispers to it, and I was like,
"Does it say be gone or
what
be
was
done?
Up with that?" And
be
he made
done, I think, not be gone. I think he says be done.
Be done, yeah. Virus be done, and
I think it's just a terrorist.
Well, he makes a big show of not listening to their conversation up above, and so I'm hoping that's going to come back around to explain what was going on there.
We know what he did, which is give that construct sentience, right? I mean,
was it true sentience, or was it an
at least
algorithm,
something much closer to true sentience, right? Because it runs through that process longer and longer and longer, and then it creates its own first own thought and starts examining its first own thought, and that's the beginning of sentience.
Yeah. Well, that was interesting, because all of a sudden we get to a new chapter, and we actually have a change. We actually have a point of view from the construct's point of view, and I actually found that a little jarring at first, because we've been very enthralled with both Isaac and Lynn's point of view throughout this whole book.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we're getting thrown into a bunch of different point of views with the construct, and even the moth. We have a point of view, and it was I found it a little bit jarring at first, and now we're also getting new points of views when all hell breaks loose, and we got the cop's point of view. So we get a bunch of new characters thrown in there, and I was curious what you guys' thoughts were on that.
Well, I mean, it was mostly last time. It was mostly Isaac and Lynn, but there were also we always have Yaharek's first person bits.
Yeah, but those are special sections. Yeah.
And there was some zooming out kind of things. We had Durkin before, when she goes and visits Ben. Ben is his name, right?
Yeah, the
the
journalist,
editor
right?
of
The rogue,
okay.
rogue
When
journalist. Yeah.
Right,
she
yeah.
visits him, we get him, we get her. We do have like the whole bit when they go and when everyone goes and steals flying things for Isaac. It kind of zooms out. So he's done that before. He's just like broadening the scope at this point, I think.
Yeah, he really ramped it up.
Yeah, I think what's new in this particular case is that it's now a machine consciousness that
Yeah.
seems to be evolving. No,
Yeah, and I think
and
that's kind
it's
of
made a point of view character.
yeah, and that's kind of the point, right? Like that. It's sort of like if you see constructs as machines that are enslaved by humans, what that engineer was doing was freeing that machine, like by giving him, giving it like sentience. It can start doing its own things. It's sort of like an idea of freeing the enslaved, which is why I would call him like a terrorist, or like, well, like a freedom fighter, kind of labor organizer kind of thing. Because let's not forget that there's still a labor conflict going on that was brutally repressed at this moment, but there is that other layer of poverty and labor riots going on in the city at the same time, with the Volyanoy strike and all of that stuff, which is, I mean, it's not just there for coloration, is my point.
Oh no, I definitely know there's a purpose to it all, because it ties into, like you said, the labor strike. That's at the same time, like when I said all hell breaking loose in the city.
Yeah,
that is a part of it, and I found that was fascinating. That labor strike was going on, as also the moth crisis was going on simultaneously in conjunction with that, and I also noticed that at the same time that correlates with Isaac and Lynn having to put their projects on hold. It stops progress on their project. This chaos stops progress on what they were trying to accomplish on their individual lives.
Yeah, and I think that's like part of like what Mievel is trying to do here is having like clarifying up to a point the connection between like individual experiences on the one hand and larger societal issues on the other hand, because obviously everything that happens in society does affect us as individuals, of course, but also what we do as individuals does have some form of effect on society, because without Isaac fucking around with Yacharek's flight and getting the grub, the moth crisis wouldn't have happened. And without the moth crisis happening, we're not sure if they would have cracked down on the strike as brutally as they have, because it feels like they have to end that strike as immediately and as brutally as possible, because they're aware of the moth crisis now, and they need to deal with that, because it's an actual like crisis that does endanger the entirety of the city in a way that the strike, while being a bit of a problem, because it's obviously not good for like the economy, would not have done. I think that's sort of like the point, that like individual small things do affect the entire state and the entire system, but the system's changes do then once again have like very direct effects on the individual people down below.
Yeah, I mean the strike, I think is it Ben as well, the journalist, when he is after he's captured and has this conversation with Durkin, that he says to her, the strike is just a cover story.
Yeah.
No, so obviously, I mean at this stage, of course, we know the government is up to no good. No, they have some motive that we don't really know yet about, but I would say it's probably nothing good.
Well, I don't know if they have like an actual motive between beyond just like keeping the city under control and extracting as much surplus value as possible from the population. I think it's just like the thing that governments do. I don't think there's like a nefarious plan to do something terrible. It's more like, let's keep the system running so those in power can get as much out of it as possible, and that's the form of stability that they're looking for. I don't think there's
Yeah,
like an evil overlord that has like a specific nefarious plan to do something bad.
Yeah, but I mean, how would selling off that research project then, for example, figure into this idea? We need a certain amount of stability and to get the most out of the city in an economic way. Apart from, of course, the short-term effect that if I sell something, then I get, of course, cash, no, and have some funding in the coffers.
Well, I mean,
Governments have been short-sighted before. That's nothing new.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Varsha, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it makes sense that it felt like a short-sighted decision, not something with an overarching nefarious purpose. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do have a question about something we talked about earlier when Jarrod was talking about the expanding POVs and getting perspective apart from Isaac and Lynn and a lot of other characters, including the construct. That felt like a very free flowing style of storytelling. A lot of modern fantasy that I've read, they have a very formulaic chapter structure. We start with 2 POVs and we stick with it, or
I blame George R. Martin.
or, or, or if we I don't know, if we say we have an omniscient I don't think we see omniscient perspectives that much. Or if you have first person, then yeah, you might switch between multiple perspectives. So is this common, or is this also different for just regular what Mieville is doing in this book? Was that more common earlier on when it was written, or was it different even for its time?
No, I think it's more like a literary, like him edging closer to like a literary style, literary fiction, like realist fiction kind of style. I mean, when you compare it to say like the Malazan Book of the Fallen does do a similar thing, because you have like sort of main focus like characters that you follow a lot, but like Stephen Erickson does pull aside to give us like insights from like completely different writers, different characters from time to time to widen the scope up to a point. It's something that you have like. I was only half joking when I said I blame George R. R. Martin for like the focus on like individual, like one chapter, one POV kind of thing, because it's very much what he brought to fantasy, and I guess it's mostly because of his back.
Oh.
Oh no.
Yeah, but yeah, I would agree with Raf there. No, it's more orientated towards literary fiction, and yeah, I mean, Malazan Book of the Fallen uses also kind of like literary or techniques that we know better from literary fiction than from fantasy, which is one of the reasons why a lot of fantasy readers, when they start that series, are so disorientated, because it doesn't play by the normal fantasy rules, but plays more by rules of other, how should I say, other literary genres, no? So
yeah, I think that's kind of the point. Like if you read something like say your Thomas Pynchon's or your David Foster Wallace's or whatnot, they do the same thing. Like they have like main focused people that you move on to, like that you follow for like a large part of the plot, and then they zoom out to have like a chapter talking about the life of a light bulb or something, which I was not making up. It's a bit in Gravity's Rainbow where you follow a light bulb, an immortal light bulb.
Sounds fun.
I didn't get along very well with Gravity's Rainbow, I have to say. But
there's a lot of reasons not to get along with that book. I'm just saying that the bit about the immortal light bulb is really funny.
I think that's a different discussion.
Yeah, but I think it's important to see that these are the influences that someone like China Mieville uses.
Yeah.
Especially, with like focus on the city, having these different aspects, having a lot of interest in bodily fluids is certainly something that you can find in Thomas Pynchon as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think it's important to see where that comes from. I don't think it's unique in fantasy. I just don't think it's that common, because fantasy usually does follow the thing that sells really well, or that everyone finds unique and does. Like, George R. Martin comes up with it like one chapter, one POV. Joe Abercrombie follows that rule, and then everyone's like, well, I guess that's how we do fantasy now.
Yeah, I think it has to do a lot also, like you say, not what sells, because J.R.R. Martin is kind of like one of the big names, and then is copied, is seen as the norm. Where
I think I don't know.
There's a lot of earlier fantasy as well. If we look at Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, that's also a little bit, how shall I say, it's not linear necessarily all the time, no?
It's not linear, but it has like one, like, I mean, it's a weird first person narrative, to be fair. I think like what Martin brought is that very tight focus on individual characters, POVs that you follow through like scenes, and you end every chapter on like a cliffhanger, and that's because his background in television, and Joe Abercrombie does have a background in television as well. It's just like a more like 90s television versus George R. Martin's 80s television. So it's a lot more edgy. It does have this like Joss Whedon weird kind of edgy, piffy dialogue kind of thing going on that George R. Martin doesn't have. And then
I think it's also perhaps a technique that's more common, or what used to be more common in thriller literature.
Yeah.
One chapter, one POV, and then, like you say, cliffhangers, and to make you read on, to make to give the story more momentum in a way.
Yeah, and I think when it first like showed up on like the so to speak like big screen, or like the big stage, we like George R. Martin's Game of Thrones being relatively popular, although I think it took forever for people to actually start reading it. Like around 2000, I think, is when it really started to blow up as a book. People, it felt novel and new and radical in a way that, doing the just like following whatever characters and switching whenever it felt like it, and making chapter differences like more or less arbitrary up to a point. Like you read Wheel of Time, the chapter breaks are often somewhat arbitrary. They do sometimes, have like one or two characters, sometimes only one POV character. But sometimes you can have like, you follow like a character and you're like, why is this like two chapters, not one chapter? It felt often somewhat arbitrary, but that switch where you do like one chapter, one POV makes chapters feel more meaningful in a way. And I get why people go like, I think it's a good idea to do that.
Yeah, Catherine says, interesting that all of Mieville's influences mentioned seem to be male, and somebody else in the comments already says, no, Le Guin is, I think, one of his influences as well.
I think there's more than just Le Guin as a female influence. I'm pretty sure. I'm just. It's more like a me problem that I'm recognizing a lot of male authors, because I've read more male authors than female authors, obviously. Just because I've read a lot of old stuff, and it's kind of difficult to get those things. But like, I assume that Mieville has read like. I mean, he's talked about like other stuff than just like Le Guin and things like that.
I'm sure he has read other female writers in fantasy or other genres, because he seems to be very well read.
He's extremely well read. I saw an interview with him last year when he was talking about Sally Rooney.
Yeah, I saw an interview with him, and he was talking about Kurt Schwitters. I mean, who outside of.
I mean, that's part of the things. Like, I don't think we're doing him justice if we're just like focusing on his fantasy and science fiction influences. He's read like a lot of the stuff that goes into this is beyond just fantasy, like beyond genre fiction. And I think that's an important aspect that makes it kind of stand out, because he's able to use these influences that go beyond just the genre fiction, because a lot of genre writers are heavily influenced just by genre fiction because they're first and foremost genre fans, and then they move on and just like start writing their own stuff and only slowly expand beyond that, I guess.
So I hear this a lot about fantasy expectations that people have about the way fantasy should be written. So I want to ask, who were the first movers who set these criteria that everyone else followed? Because Tolkien didn't do the one chapter, one POV, or more simplified narrative style, I think. So, who were the first movers in setting the standards of the genre?
I think like I'm not an expert, but I think it's very hard to find. Like for the one chapter, one POV thing, I think George R. Martin is the one that you need to point to.
Yeah, I mean, I know Donaldson did it in his Gap series cycle.
Yeah, but when did he start writing the Gap cycle? Because I think that's also like mid
before,
'90s.
Yeah, it was early '90s, so it was before
Early
Martin,
'90s. So
just before Martin, but
yeah,
but it was, but I'm not sure who would have done it before that.
I mean, technically, you have books where you can find that before, but like I feel with Game of Thrones, it really like broke into the mainstream, and I think that's important. I mean, George R. Martin is aware and has read Stephen R. Donaldson. I'm pretty sure I've read like an interview where he talks about Thomas Covenant at some point. Because like, yeah, it's a great book. I've read it, and technically, there's a few chapters within Thomas Covenant where you don't follow, well, Thomas Covenant, but someone else. I mean, especially like in book 2 and 3.
Well, yeah, later books, yeah, not the first one, but
the first one is just Thomas whining all the time, and then book 2 you got like the blind guy whose name I keep forgetting because he's really not that important. Heil something, and suddenly you have like perspectives from his perspective and stuff like So it's been done before, but like the very strict kind of thing with and I think that's part of like what makes Game of Thrones sort of like the thing there is that they don't have like chapter titles. They just have the chapters are just named after the POV.
Yeah,
it's very much rammed in your face in that situation.
Yeah,
I think that's sort of what made it so explicit with George R. Martin, because like even like Joe Abercrombie, who does it very well, does give his chapters very ironic titles.
Yeah, I don't know either if J.R.R. Martin was the first. Probably not, but he's most likely the most influential and the most that people read the most as well and know about. Therefore, I would say.
Yeah. I think like that's I mean that's like how influence works, right? It's like you don't have to be the first one; you have to be the one that everyone reads, and that's certainly George R. Martin.
Yeah.
For that part.
But I think there's in general this kind of like feeling that with J.R.R. Martin, fantasy changed somehow, not that it got darker than the whole kind of multi-POV thing. I think there's this general idea there.
Yeah, and that's because people don't read books. Because obviously fantasy was dark before George R. Martin, and George R. Martin will be the first person to admit that. I think it's just that George R. Martin's like that Game of like Song of Ice and Fire was just incredibly successful once it really blew up, and that's sort of like why people realize that. And like I remember back in the days when people started to realize, 2000, 2005, when people were like, "Whoa, have you read this George R. Martin guy? It's insane!" Like before the TV show, it's so modern, it's so radical. It's like, yeah. You guys ever read Conan the Barbarian? Because a lot of the things, and George R. Martin I think works well as an author because he started being active like in the 60s and 70s. He's been around for a long time. Yeah. So he's one of the authors that like took in those two like major strands of fantasy, like the Tolkien epic fantasy strand that Tolkien kind of started, following like trying to write myth and stuff like that then gets like, misunderstood by people like Terry Brooks, who's forced to write something for Ballantine and, that strand. But he also takes in that more like pulp, short story, American style of fantasy that is way more beholden to other forms of American, like mostly American, like Anglophone literature of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. That actually, is more beholden to crime fiction and other stuff. Like, your pulp stories and whatever comes after that.
Also, Martin has written in other genres as well than just fantasy. He has written science fiction, for example. No?
He's written science fiction. He's written horror novels. His vampire novel, what is called Fever Dream, is actually really fun. Fever Dream is really good. Windhaven's kind of boring.
And he has created this, how shall I say, multi-writer universe wildcards.
Yes.
Oh
where
yeah,
several
the
writers
comic
are
book kind of superhero
contributing
thing.
to one universe, one story universe. So he's behind that as well. No, so
Yeah.
he's much more prolific than just Game of Thrones or the Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important. Like a lot of the stuff that he does happened before he starts even beginning to write epic fantasy, and you can tell that because that once again draws in influences that a lot of people that are just writing fantasy don't have. You know, there's always that like the D&D fantasy strand. Your Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickmans, R.A. Salvatore's, and people that are influenced by that, and that's a very, very narrow form of fantasy that is very formulaic.
Yeah.
It's like if people get paid for writing fan fiction, I guess. Without like all the transgressions that actual fan fiction does have. Because there's no sex in R.A. Salvatore. Just saying. I've read like 15 of his novels. It's like it's not happening because TSR will not stand for that kind of stuff.
Okay, back to Perdido Street Station.
No, we digress.
After this, which definitely does have sex. So I mean, we have to give it that at least.
Yeah, it does have sex.
So I mean, there is that. Yeah. Do we have any other insights, questions that we haven't touched on yet?
Sorry, go ahead, Jarrod.
No, go ahead.
I was going to follow up a bit more on the construct becoming sentient. Did we? In the chapter where we got the construct POV, did it leave the house, do something, and come back? Okay.
Yes. And very sneakily it wraps. It seems to be kind of like have some type of wheels or maybe those caterpillar thread things that it uses to move. And it has, strips of cloth around that so that it don't make any noise, so that it can kind of like sneak out and then sneak back in.
It's fascinating.
It definitely is a fascinating new story arc that's or character arc that's added there.
Well, we don't know what it exactly does. It just goes, does something, and come back.
And it cleans better as well. That's another thing.
It's sticking to its original duty dutifully.
It's a sleeper agent, just like its owner.
That's true. I wanted to discuss the scene where the technician comes in a bit more because I feel like I interpreted that completely differently. Obviously, you all got it the same way, so I must be wrong. So I'm trying to figure out where the disconnect happened. So what I thought happened was that the construct, since it was already looping, we were told before that it was going around in circles and whatnot, and that it maybe caught a virus. When the technician came in, he observed that it was becoming self-aware, and so he did something. I thought that he was trying to figure out how it's becoming self-aware, so that's what he added into it, but then it became apparently more self-aware when he did that. So I guess he did hack it in some way to give it more sentience, but I feel like the seeds were already there with the virus, and I was wondering if the virus came from the slake moth grub also.
No. So I don't think so. The main reason why I don't think the virus can come from the slake moth grub is that the slake moth grub is on the top floor, and the construct is on the bottom floor, and the construct can't climb stairs.
No, but it's empathic. So since it's a self-awareness virus and a program,
It's an interesting idea what Varsha is sporting.
It's like I think like the way I read it, and that's just like me, is that what happened with the construct is a mere mechanical failure, which is explained that like one of the cogs was slightly ajar or something, and that has like always led to its going in circles and circles. And because that cog is kind of already ajar. That's why, like, feeding it that new program, because the technician feeds it like a new program on fucking punch cards, which is great. I love punch card computing. Is such a brilliant thing. It reminds me, there's a wonderful part in like one of the early Harry Harrison stainless steel rat stories, which are sci-fi stories, but they're written in the 50s, and early 60s, and it's a space story, and the criminal is trying to escape like a spaceship. So he hacks the spaceship's computer by taking out some of the punch cards and adding a couple of holes. So he changes the program, and it's so brilliant because it's like, yeah, that's how hacking might have worked in the 50s.
Yeah.
But he just assumes that computers will work like that in like the year 2030 or 2050 or whatever. It's so funny. And I think that's sort of like what he does. He knows that because of like the gears having shifted, probably just like through mechanical use or abuse, it is receptive to the new program. And then he adds the new program, which allows it to become fully sentient. Which is a great metaphor, right? It's like that, like physical abuse makes you receptive for like revolutionary ideas, because like physical abuse is basically what like having the gears shift through whatever it kind of boils down to.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, it says in here that the Constructs virus was entirely the result of information feedback and not any kind of hardware failure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Any kind of hardware. Yeah. I was trying to work out that scene, and I just had a lot of options of what was going on. What you all said made sense, but I didn't agree with any of the options I had. So the other thing, we were talking about what genre this is last time. I think it reads for me the most like science fiction set in a world that has physics different from ours. I really enjoyed the sequence where Isaac was building his crisis engine. What did you all think of that?
I love weird non-existent physics. I think there's like a very good like cyberpunk. You can read this as cyberpunk, I think, as horror cyberpunk. Maybe more like electropunk, because it does have like some electricity and stuff. Like it does go down that route, but it does what it mainly does, which is good, is it actually has the punk aspect. It's not just like, hey, let's add steam to everything and be cool about it. It's more like having the societal pressures and having, the fight against the system, against the machine, which is like very much built into this. And I think it does have that whole idea of like using science. Like even the magic is very scientific, right? Like the communatrix is using like this battery powered thing, and he's taking a lot of these like attempts to build like weird science that we have like in the 19th and early 20th century, like the orgone and stuff like that. If you've ever heard about that, it's really fascinating shit. Occultists in the 20s and 30s were up to some really weird stuff.
Yeah, I think that especially like the communicatrix, and also kind of like how the government people then communicate with the ambassador is an interesting mix between this, not too steampunk, no, so they have to crank a handle to feed the battery and all this type of thing, but also the communicatrix is that she uses her hands, and she traces symbols with her hands. So this is more like occult, almost kind of like, I mean, the whole scene, of course, it is like a seance almost, no, with somebody who is, of course, still alive, but barely in a way, no?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what makes it so fascinating, because a lot of magic, when you really look at like practices of magic that we have in our world, a lot of that stuff is insanely scientific. It's just like science that doesn't work, but like you have to follow precise rules to do stuff, and you do research and calculate numbers and do crazy weird things. But it always boils down to, we have to have rules, and he just takes that and uses it. And you have like the sympathetic magic aspect of having the anchor tattoo drawn on her arm just like at the point where it was on Ben's arm, so you get closer to the subject, and then she gets in tune with it by reading his like op-ed that he wrote and stuff like that. And it uses those things, but like if you've ever looked into, you know, Western magic or any form of magic for whatever reasons you might have done so, or alchemy, that stuff is extremely scientific. It's just like science that doesn't work. But the approach is very similar. He just like extrapolates from that and just adds more like gearboxes and weird stuff.
Yeah.
Because they're cool.
Yeah, and he really has an outstanding vocabulary for that, for all those descriptions and stuff like that. That he must have taken from so many places that he puts in there and has these pages explaining it all. It's a really fascinating read just to go through that stuff when Isaac's explaining everything that he does, and then when all the other sciencey magic stuff that goes on too. It's a lovely delve into that stuff that makes the book so interesting to just keep going on.
I did love that bit, and then it's like in the part we talked about last time when Isaac explains crisis energy theory to Jarrod, and we have like these like 2 pages of like physics explanations where you like sit there and like, no, this is not how physics works, Isaac.
It was fascinating nonetheless. It's just...
Yeah, I have to say as well, I mean, I love the prose of the book, the way his style, his like you say, the vocabulary, the words that he uses, but in general, kind of like the imagination that's kind of like unfolding in that book is just on a different plane, I have to say.
How much would you say that 1984 has inspired this book?
Yeah,
because with the militia, it's not that far away, is it?
No, you're right. Like, I mean, I've actually made a note of the militia where it said policing by decentralized fear.
Yeah. I highlighted that.
Yeah.
But how much of a watch does the government have on the populace? How much of a big brother is there?
I don't know.
That's
really.
kind of the question. You don't have to have that much. You just have to, build that fear that you might. And that's like how totalitarian systems work. Like Stalin didn't know what every person in the Soviet Union thought. He just created that image where everyone thought that maybe someone else might be the next informer. And that's how you actually control it.
Yeah, I think as well, it's this informant system. Like I was very much reminded of the Stasi.
Yeah,
like in Eastern Germany, kind of like variant of this, no? So I think it's just this inducing of fear where nobody really knows who you can trust and who you can't trust, no? I think that's how that works. So
Yeah, the decentralized fear, I think, is like is the key part there.
And also like the militia's agents who can morph into different persons, into different people, like when they find that sucked empty couple in the laneway.
Yeah.
And when they then leave out of the laneway, they have changed into different people.
Although I'm not quite sure if that's literally or just like that they're really good actors.
Yeah, I don't know either how they affected it, if it's literally or just are they good actors, but they definitely seem to have the I mean, I don't know if it's meant in the way of, how shall I say, shape-shifting. No, I don't know, but
no, I think it's just like them being really, really good actors, I guess. That's how I read it. But I might be wrong. I mean, it's a world in which a lot of things are possible.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of Jarrod so far? I think that's like another one we need to come back to through mostly like the 2 new first-person bits that we got at the end, because they're always at the end of like a section of like a part.
Yeah, before a new part starts, we have.
Exactly. So, what do you guys think of him so far?
The first new section we got, it almost felt like he was making peace with his lack of ability to fly. But then he came back and doubled down on Isaac with stuff about torque and things. So that was interesting. It felt like he had found a way to live without his wings, but then he came back to the city. Nothing had changed.
Yeah.
Mm.
Any more guesses what his choice theft of the third degree might be?
No idea yet. No
No,
idea.
no clue.
No idea.
Yeah.
Um,
I try to not to say anything because I know what it boils down to, and it's interesting.
yeah. I think he's definitely an interesting guy. He seems to be very much, I mean, out of necessity, probably a loner. But even if he meets other people or groups of other beings, he prefers not to engage too much. What we get from especially those new passages.
Yeah, and
He's very
also,
much a hunter. That as well. I think that's probably something to keep in mind as well, that he's very much a hunter. And I was wondering at some stage when those moths have escaped, if Yagarek would have a mind that is alien enough from a human mind, that he would actually be able to hunt them without them sucking him dry, because he is removed enough from humans.
That's a good question. I don't think. I mean, it's a city, right? And they have a Garuda population. They have a cacti population. Apparently, those are not far enough removed from it, because otherwise, someone would have thought of it. Or fucking Motley would have sent in his like cactus enforcer that Lynn always meets, right?
Yeah.
If those people were safe.
Yeah, the hunt for the moths though has just begun. Really, it's we've barely touched that yet. So I'm interested in it. You mentioned the Yagarek. He's also like what Raph was saying earlier about different levels of immigrants, because he's definitely not in with the other bird people that are in the city. So he's quite the outcast. So his perspective is quite unique, I think.
Yeah, because he still believes himself. I don't think Yakarek does see himself as a migrant. He sees himself as an outsider. He's a visitor to New Krobison. He just wants to get his thing fixed and then go back and be the badass that he always was.
I don't think he's kind like a migrant as such. I think he sees himself as exiled.
Exile
and hoping to reverse that somehow.
Yeah, certainly.
What did you think of the bit where he thought that the people in the city are more isolated compared to the Garuda, but then it turns out it's all a lie? People do depend on each other because of him having the dependency on Isaac, and so he has to help Isaac take care of Lublamai. I thought that was an interesting thought process.
There's a lot to unpack in there, because like the idea of isolation within cities is certainly something that Marxists and people that came after just Marxists have thought about a lot. There's a wonderful thing where I think it's an Adorno thing where he talks about like how cars are fascist because cars isolate us from other people because we're driving all alone in our individual spaces and don't talk to anyone else, and like and Guy Debord does pick that up as well, and well, he doesn't call it fascist, he just talked about the spectacle at that point, but it's an interesting aspect that so much of like life in cities where humans are crammed together, or like in this case New Krobison are crammed together, people are crammed together like nowhere else, but we're all sort of doing our own thing and trying to just like keep to ourselves in a lot of ways, there is something to that view of like being isolated. And what makes it so fascinating is that like when he realized that yes, there are also like still like webs of connection and relationships and so forth going on and dependence going on, is that on the other hand, Yakarek, as someone who comes from these egalitarian, anarchist tribes or whatever you want to call them, was kicked out of that for being more egotistical, right? He's done something that was very much about himself. He himself isolated himself from the rest because he stole someone else's choice. So he's more isolated in his society, which he obviously thinks is superior to the city, than people in the city who he sees as isolated. So there's like that weird like double thing going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a lot of food for thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might call that. You might say that.
Do we think the moths are some torque-induced monstrosities, or are they just completely different kinds of beings, like the ambassador of hell and the weaver?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think they're just like a natural thing, sort of. I don't think they're torque-induced, but they're just like from somewhere else. I mean, obviously, someone caught those grubs somewhere and packaged them and sent them to Nucroboson. So I guess they have to be like native somewhere jungly, I guess, because like the cage they were like in at the research thing in the beginning was higher temperature, higher humidity, and dark, shady, like jungly place.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they have no natural predators. So wherever they are from, they were at the top of the food chain, it seems like.
Yeah, as far as we know, there is,
Well, Catherine, you'll have fun with the end of this book when you realize who Yakarek is. He might be a tragic hero. He might have a flaw. He might have done something terrible.
Yeah.
You're right on all of these counts. The question is like how you weight each of those. And I just can't wait for you all to find out.
You have way too much fun here, Raf, I have to say.
No, I see. Here's the thing: is I read the whole thing before, and it's interesting to see like how cleverly he does this. Like Yakarek is very sympathetic at this point, right? He's done something. He's obviously suffering, and his perspective is because Nucroboson is described so vilely. His perspective as an outsider is sort of refreshing. He's sort of like the he's a bit of like the noble savage trope too, right? In a way. And it's easy to be very sympathetic to him, and we're supposed to be.
Well, yeah, he's definitely relatable in some respects. No, there is some stuff going on where we say, yeah, we can relate to him and feel empathy towards him, perhaps even. No, yeah,
and that's very interesting, because also remember that we heard about he did something terrible, and that never came up again. From this point onwards, it's all about like giving him back the power of flight.
Yeah,
and no one's ever asked whether that was that's like a justified thing to do.
Yeah. Which brings us back to Isaac, of course, no? And Isaac, how he operates. And earlier when we were talking about him, and that he's not, why didn't he kill the caterpillar? No, I was wondering, like, is empathy and kind of like how much or how little in general is shown in Croberson? Like, I mean, it's definitely a theme somehow, and with Isaac that he seems to have perhaps a bit of a maybe misguided empathy by wanting to help Yakarek, by wanting to not kill the caterpillar.
From Isaac's point of view, it feels, I mean, I think you might be right, but from Isaac's point of view, it feels like an interest in the science aspect that drives him, like to the exclusion of all else. But
if that was the case, if it was just an interest in science, then he would have killed the bird without any problem. And he
I
did
think
not.
he's just a naive, nice guy who gets interested in just about everything. And I don't know. I mean, I've known people like that in science. Like, you talk to people that do physics or chemistry or whatever. There's a lot of these kind of people around. They're like, wow, they get excited about like figuring out shit, and they're really nice people and really good at heart, slightly naive, and they could never hurt like something. They could never hurt a fly. But they'll happily invent something that could just eradicate the entire planet because they're figuring it out, and it's just like so cool to figure stuff out. And I think that's sort of like what Isaac is. The image of like science without ethics, or like without like thoughtful ethics, which is like very much what science is, right? People that go like, let's figure this out because we're really, really curious, and not thinking about the consequences, because the chase for new knowledge is there. But those people aren't evil. Those people are often like incredibly nice people. They just like keep just, you know.
So it's more like the blind spot then, that they're kind of like so focused on the one thing that everything else falls by the wayside.
I think it's more like that thing that like Pratchett always talks about when he says like, if there is a red button that says the end of the universe button, please don't press. The first human that will pass it will definitely press that button. It's just like, it's just a curiosity, and you kind of don't think about the consequences. I don't know. It's like, it's a human thing. A lot of humans are like that. I'm probably like that. I would press that button. What could possibly go wrong?
It can't be that.
Even after having read all those novels that tell you what can go wrong.
Human nature,
but they're just fiction.
That totally eradicates my belief in literature and that it has a use for society.
Look, they're just fiction. It's all made up. I'm pretty sure reality isn't like that.
Oh dear.
I think another reason why we relate so well to Yagarek is because we are also, the reader are also the outsiders looking in, and that's what he is. I think that connection is made on purpose by Mieville.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. Yeah, that we as readers only have an observer position. Yeah.
So Britain says Isaac's the Oppenheimer of Nuclear which I thought was where we were going with the crisis energy aspect of the story. But then we seem to have met an analog for nuclear energy in Torque. So I'm curious where we're going with crisis energy, whether it'll be better or worse than Torque. In terms of what bad things it might be put to use for.
Yeah, it's also like, I feel like we're often, like sometimes at least, kind of giving Oppenheimer too much. Like, there was a point when Oppenheimer knew what he was doing, right? They were developing a bomb. They knew they were developing like an actual weapon. But there's like one of the there's an article I read a while ago, like one of the colleagues of Fermi, who actually did like a lot of nuclear physics stuff, and at some point he just like left science and just went. And there's like the theory that he kind of, because he was doing nuclear physics in like the 20s, and he's like, he kind of realized where this was going, and he just like stopped and went to like a monastery and stopped doing science and just like became a monk. And I think that's sort of like that paradox, like when you realize where you're going, and the question like who that is, and like, obviously, with current movies and stuff like that, Oppenheimer is certainly getting his revival. And if you've read, and that's an interesting thing, if you read the last Cormac McCarthy novels, The Passenger and Stella Maris, they're very much also about that kind of thing, because like they're obviously about like 2 kids of one of the scientists that worked on the same project with Oppenheimer, and how that like rupture kind of impacts them. Which, go read those books. They're really good books. Also very sad because it's Cormac McCarthy. They're not exactly written to make you happy.
Yeah, he's not necessarily a very upbeat writer. Yeah.
But I think it's very much like dealing with the consequences of human curiosity is like sort of one of those things, because like it's, on the one hand, it's like kind of what makes humans, right? It's like figuring out shit by just doing things because we can and seeing what happens, and then dealing with the consequences afterwards. That's humanity. But on the other hand, we figured out some pretty horrific shit on the way.
Yeah.
And Isaac does very much embody that. And I think it works because it is very much like Isaac is. You can tell Isaac is a nice guy. He's a very nice guy. He doesn't do anything evil. But the consequences of what he does might just be really, really terrifying.
Yeah. He's being cagey about his research. It felt like it could be because he's worried about how what he's working on could be misused, but it also feels like a little superstitious in some sense. Like, I can't talk about this yet because it might not succeed. So yeah, it's interesting. It's unclear for me at this moment whether he is aware that he could produce something that could become, weapons of mass destruction. Yeah.
I understand that. I understand Isaac's trepidation to talk to other people about what he's doing, because like when I'm writing a story, I have a hard time talking about that story to other people, because I don't want other ideas influencing what I'm doing. And
Right.
Well, I mean,
it's that kind of thing,
Yeah, I think like other people may have realized what crisis energy does. Because if he's built like a crisis engine, that would mean like source, endless energy.
Yeah, he said
there's a lot of
perpetual
stuff you
motion
can do with that.
Oh yeah, the
In fact,
implications,
like
man.
imagine you build a crisis engine, which is a perpetuum mobile. A society like Nucrobisons, which is a capitalist society built on the exploitation of workers. You don't need those workers anymore. You don't need anything except crisis engines, and that completely takes like all of society apart. You don't even just like have to think about like building like a better weapon. It's just like having endless energy just eradicates the system. It's sort of like, well, when you get your luxury space communism, basically. And I'm not sure if Isaac is aware of that. But it certainly it pays to keep in mind that like having a endless source of energy does have consequences.
Yeah. Did when Isaac was talking to Jarrod about crisis energy in the previous set of chapters we read, did he talk about conservation of crisis energy at all?
Nope.
No, right? So it's some endless source that he can draw from, it seems like, at this point.
He does even call it a perpetuum mobile in one of the chapters when he talked about the crisis engine.
Yeah, when he finishes getting it to work, I guess he's happy about having built a perpetual motion machine, or that's what I called it in my head. But I had one more thing to discuss about that scene with the crisis engine. When he talks about the cheese needing to know that it's in crisis, that his intention to destroy the cheese matters. And I thought that was very interesting. Like, what is the entity that's detecting his intention? Is it, it sounds like it might be cheese, but yeah. I can't pretend to destroy this cheese. I need to actually go through with it so that the powers that be know that I am serious about destroying this thing. So it goes into crisis.
I think it's like the universe in general. Also, Mike, I agree. He gets excited about cheese, and I very much empathize with him on that accord. Look, it's cheese.
Yeah. I think that's probably gets us back also to that the novel tries to, how shall I say, to look at different types of consciousness, kind like
Yeah.
as well. No, I mean, we get a lot of different types of consciousness that we're introduced to.
That's true.
And who says that cheese doesn't have a consciousness? We might just
Yeah.
not know about it.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
You ever read The Cheese and the Worms by Carlo Ginzburg?
No.
It's a brilliant book. So Carlo Ginzburg is a microhistorian. He's is a historian. He writes microhistory, so he focuses on like one very specific small topic and tries to extrapolate things from that. And The Cheese and the Worms is about the inquisitorial protocols, or like in this case, not the inquisitorial protocols, but like the documents that a 15th century, I think, Miller in northern Italy wrote about like how he saw the world, the universe. And they were discovered, they kept alive. He was, doing some very heretical thinking at that point. And he saw that, like, life exists, like, you have the matter, and just like cheese spontaneously creates worms, that, maggots that like spontaneously exist in cheese. That's sort of like how life starts to begin and stuff. He builds like his own creation myth out of that. It's really interesting. I just like when you said like maybe cheese has its own consciousness, my life jumped there because I've been reading a lot of Carlo Ginzburg recently.
Yeah, but I thought it jumps into an interesting direction, I would say, because I mean, we have the construct that's on this verge of getting consciousness. No, so
Yeah.
if we have enough crisis energy, who knows what the fallout of that might be then on a level of consciousness and creating new types of consciousness. No?
Very much.
Because we seem to have a lot of other, how shall I say, all the energy forms that were introduced to in this book seem to be linked to consciousness or can affect consciousness in one form or another. No? The torque in a very dramatic and very negative way. Then we have the crisis energy. Then we have this, let's say psychic energy, for a better word, that the communicatrix uses. And then we have the weaver, who also is a type of interdimensional energy or force field that he is operating in. And they're all linked to consciousness in a way.
Yeah.
Also, like one of those random thoughts that I had before, like the fact that they call their god Jabber. You think that's like a deliberate connection to the Jabberwock?
I think so. Yeah, that was the first thing I was thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
I don't
like
know that reference.
What?
I don't know that reference. What is it?
It's a poem by what's his name? The guy who wrote
Carroll.
Alice in Wonderland, but I keep
Lewis
forgetting
Carroll.
the name.
Oh yeah,
Lewis Carroll. That's the name.
Yeah.
It's a weird, funny poem about like a made-up creature, which is a Jabberwocky.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
It's kind
It's
of
like it's a nonsense poem.
Yeah, it's a catch-all for made-up creatures. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we have a lot of made-up creatures in New Crobuzon, no? So
like deliberately calling the god that everyone is praying to a made-up creature is kind of funny.
that as well. That of course is.
That is funny.
But
and I think that's sort of like the point, right?
Yeah, fits in with the rest of the cosmology, no? Because hell is also seen as a human-made realm, because the people in there are close enough to humans that they're afraid of the slake moth. So fits into that as well. Yeah.
Well, you know what they say. It's like hell is other people.
Yeah. Who is that? That's Sartre, isn't it?
That's Sartre.
Yeah. Hell is other people. Yeah. Yeah.
He might be right.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts and ideas, questions? If not, then I would perhaps suggest we wrap it up here, because I mean, we covered, like the first time, a lot
Yeah.
of stuff.
Well,
you know.
join the machine, join the construct revolution.
There you go. Get rid of the Jack walk.
Okay, with that revolutionary approach,
Rampant.
we
Rampant.
might say goodbye to our viewers in the chat as well. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for discussing with me, Jarrod, Raf, Varsha, and of course everybody in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
And till our next our next discussion in, I don't know, probably something like 2 weeks again. We'll see. Okay, thank you and bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, bye.